The loudest man in the arena needed 5,000 people to build his challenge. The small man in the 7th row would need about 10 seconds to answer it, and he would do it without ever closing his hand into a fist. It was a mid-sized arena in the early 1970s, one of those exhibition nights promoters loved because they cost little and filled seats. Masters of a dozen styles had come to break boards and shatter tiles. The headliner was a champion at the peak of his fame, blonde and broad and easy in front of a microphone, a man who had learned a room of strangers could be won with a joke as easily as with a kick. He had spent the last hour winning them, and now, with the spotlight on him and the crowd chanting his name, he decided to win them one more time at someone else's expense. He raised the microphone and said the sentence no one expected, the martial artist everyone had been whispering about. The one from the films was fast on camera, he would give him that. But speed on film was not fighting. Put him in a real ring with a real fighter, he said, and he wouldn't last one round. The arena did not gasp, it laughed. 2 students near the aisle stood and struck exaggerated poses, and one of them kicked an empty folding chair into the walkway and shouted for everyone to be careful because the movie master might come flying in from the ceiling. The chair stopped because a small man in a dark jacket had put one hand on the back of it. He had been sitting 7 rows from the ring, half in shadow, eyes on the champion. He had not clapped during the demonstrations. He had not smiled when the boards broke. He had simply watched, the way a man watches something he intends to understand, and now he was standing. If you want to know why a quiet man in the 7th row was the most dangerous person in that building, stay with this, because he had already been studying the champion for an hour before either of them said a word. The student who had kicked the chair turned and asked if there was a problem. The small man looked at the chair, then at the student's face, and said only, "Move the chair." It was not loud, and it was not angry, and that was what made the 3 people nearest him stop laughing. The student, annoyed by the calm more than any insult, pushed the chair harder and told him to move it himself. 2 seats away, a man who had come with the visitor leaned forward and said one word, low and tight, "Bruce." "Don't." The name dropped into the row like a match into dry grass. The tall student's grin twitched and did not fully return, and around them the whisper began to move, seat to seat. "Is that him? That's him? It can't be." But out in the ring, under the lights, the champion heard none of it and kept talking because the microphone was in his hand, and as far as he knew, the arena still belonged to him. The small man tried to pass. The student slid across and planted a flat palm against his chest. That was the first mistake, not the force of it, because there was almost none, but that it was casual and dismissive and public. A touch meant to tell everyone watching that one man had permission to be there and the other did not. The student pressed harder and told him to sit, and the small man's body moved less than an inch, and the student's arm bent awkwardly, as if he had shoved a wall that somehow knew how to breathe. His friend told him to push harder. So he did, shoulder behind it this time, and the small man rotated a few degrees, not a dodge, just a small turn, and the student's own weight dragged him forward into the very chair he had kicked into the aisle. It scraped across the concrete. The people nearby went quiet. The small man set the chair back in its row and walked toward the ring. Here is the part worth staying for, because the champion still had not seen any of it. The student grabbed the small man's sleeve from behind. Farther out, 5,000 people were still laughing at the champion's jokes. Up close, 20 were staring at a hand clenched around a stranger's jacket, suddenly aware they were sitting beside a fuse that was already lit. The small man turned his head just enough to show his profile and said, "Take your hand off." The student laughed, but it came out wrong, and asked, "Or what?" The swing that followed was not even a punch. It was a slap, wide and ugly, meant to make the whole row erupt. The small man's right hand rose, and the student's wrist stopped 3 inches from his cheek and stayed there. His knees bent, and the small man turned the wrist down with so little effort it looked like a polite adjustment, and the student went to one knee. His friend lunged from behind and wrapped both arms around the small man's shoulders, and the small man simply lowered his weight so there was suddenly nothing to lift, drove one short elbow back into the ribs, and guided the larger man down into an empty row, like someone helping a drunk find his seat. That was when the ring finally saw. The champion stopped mid-sentence, the microphone still near his mouth, no words coming out. The promoter turned, then the judges, then the students at the corner, and the sound of the arena began to change, section by section, as thousands of people understood, in a slow spreading wave, that the real event was no longer under the lights, and the small man straightened his jacket and did not look pleased, and did not look angry, which was somehow worse. He looked as if the last 10 seconds had been an inconvenience. The promoter saw disaster and money arrive in the same instant, and knew they were the same thing. He grabbed a second microphone and announced the famous visitor had joined them tonight. The arena detonated, and the champion, who had built the entire evening on a joke that was now walking toward his ring, found his performers smile and called out that if the man had wanted to demonstrate something, he could simply have asked. The visitor did not smile and did not wave. He started down the aisle, and at the foot of the ring steps one of the champion's senior students stepped into his path, bigger than the others, arms crossed to make the size difference part of the show. No one walked into their ring without permission, he said. The visitor stopped one step below him, looked past him to the champion in the center of the ring, and said, "Then ask him if he is ready to give the truth." If you want to see how a man talks his way into a trap he built himself, stay with this, because the champion was about to be given every chance to walk it back, and his pride would refuse all of them. The senior student shoved him, and when he jabbed a finger toward the visitor's chest, the visitor caught it, not the hand, not the wrist, just the finger, and turned it a few degrees, and the man's whole posture collapsed, knees bending, mouth opening on a sound that was not a word. The champion's voice cracked across the speakers, saying the student's name, and the visitor released him at once. And the champion, because 5,000 people were now watching, and there was no version of the next few minutes in which silence did not look like fear, said the words that closed the trap around himself. He said, "Let him in." The visitor came through the ropes, and the champion, still holding the microphone, made his second mistake. Rather than face the man himself, he sent a student first, calling it a speed test. What the crowd could not see, but the visitor understood at once, was that the champion was not testing him at all. He was studying him, distance, timing, the habits a fighter reveals only when he is truly moving. He wanted to turn a mystery into a pattern before he ever stepped forward himself. So the visitor gave him a lesson instead of a pattern. The student came in with a real stance and a real punch, and the visitor stepped inside it, redirected the wrist across the man's own body, touched 2 fingers to the back of his neck, and stopped. To the crowd it looked like nothing. To the student it felt like a door opening under his feet. He was not hurt. He had simply been shown the exact place where the fight would have ended if the visitor had wanted it to. The champion watched, and the visitor watched the champion watching. And when the student had been helped up, the visitor turned to the man with the microphone and asked, quietly enough that only the ring heard it, "You watched, did you learn?" The champion's face changed so fast it startled the people closest to him. The entertainer was gone. What stood in the center of the ring now was the fighter, and the fighter finally understood he had run out of students to send. He came himself, and to his credit, he was good. He shortened his stance, quieted his feet, and stopped performing for the crowd. He threw a front kick to measure distance, and the visitor slid back less than an inch, so it passed through empty air. He threw a real side kick, the one that split boards, and the visitor stepped inside it before it could unfold, so the shin slid harmlessly past his hip and touched an open palm to the champion's chest, not a strike, just a place where a strike could have been, and stepped back. The champion knew what that touch meant, even if the crowd did not, and it drove him harder. He came with combinations now, and the visitor moved through them rather than around them, and each time his hand came to rest somewhere, the champion had left open the shoulder, the ribs, the chest again, nothing hard enough to hurt. everything clear enough to answer the sentence the champion had spoken into the microphone an hour before, and the crowd, which had laughed on cue at the start of the night, began to read the touches, each one a silent point on a scoreboard no one in the champion's corner wanted to see. The laughter was gone, replaced by the low, uncertain sound a room makes when a thing it was sure about begins to crack. Then the crowd turned, the way crowds do. A voice tore out of the seats, telling the visitor to stop hiding and fight fair. And for half a second, the champion's eyes flicked toward the noise, toward the room he was losing, and that half second was the opening. He threw the fastest, cleanest strike of the night, a straight right with no decoration left in it, a real punch from a man who knew how to land one. The visitor's hand caught it at the wrist and turned it a few degrees. The champion's knuckles passed beside his cheek, and the visitor's other fist came to rest an inch beneath the champion's chin and stopped there and did not move. The arena went silent. The champion stared at the fist he could feel but not see finishing. Everything in the room gave him permission to stop. Even his own students had gone quiet. But humiliation has its own momentum, and the champion ripped his wrist free and shoved the visitor in the chest with both hands, driving him back 2 steps. The crowd surged because they saw the visitor give ground, but he did not stumble. He stopped exactly where he chose to stop, looked down at the place the hands had struck, then slowly back up, and this time his hands rose, not into a boxing guard, not into any stance the students at the corner would recognize. They rose like doors closing. The champion saw it and understood. The demonstration was over. He came off the ropes with everything he had left, the fastest sequence of the night, each strike covering the last. The visitor moved through all of it, parried the jab with a touch, slipped the cross by a hair, checked the kick before it had power, let the back fist pass over his shoulder, and then his open hand touched the champion's throat. Not hard, not even pressure. Just 2 fingers at the line where the fight would have ended if this had been a real one, and everything stopped. The visitor held it there for 1 breath, then lowered his hand and stepped back, and the mercy of it landed harder than any strike could have. The champion stood in the center of his own ring, chest heaving, and did not attack again. For a long moment, no one in the building made a sound. Then the champion did the thing that made the night worth remembering, and it was not anything the visitor had done. He walked to the ropes, took the microphone from the pale and silent promoter, and turned to face the 5,000 people he had made laugh an hour earlier. His voice came out rougher now, and quieter, and somehow stronger for having no performance left in it. He had told them, earlier, that the visitor was fast on camera, and that it wasn't fighting. He looked at the man across the ring, then back at the crowd, and said, "I was wrong." What they had seen was not camera speed. It was timing and control and discipline, and if the man had chosen to hurt him, he would not be standing there talking to them. And then he said the sentence the whole night had been an argument against. He said the visitor's name, and he said he can fight. The arena did not answer with a chant. It answered with a wall of sound, thousands of voices crashing into each other at once. The visitor stood in it for only a moment, then gave the champion a single small nod, not forgiveness exactly, not friendship, respect, and stepped back through the ropes. The aisle that had been blocked by a folding chair was open now, and the students who had shoved him lowered their eyes as he passed, and no one reached out to stop him. Years later, people who had been close enough would argue about the details, who moved first, how hard that last touch had really been, whether the champion had been careless or the visitor had simply been impossible. But the ones near enough to hear the champion take the microphone at the end always told that part the same way. The loudest man in the arena had needed 5,000 people to build his challenge. The quiet one had needed about 10 seconds, and 1 inch he chose never to close to answer it.